All right, so today we're going to go through JavaScript strings and arrays. Last time we went through the objects. Uh, da, 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 da. Also, I need to put the object doc in here. But we went through objects. We also went through numbers in the previous class as a review. So yeah, strings and arrays are what's next, and then beyond this, it's time for us to start focusing on React and React components. We're gonna work through our JavaScript logic and problem solving in JavaScript before we get to React components. All right, so let's look at strings to start. All right, we're gonna try and breeze through this document as much as possible since we have been working with strings for such a long while. All right, the power of words. Words are very important to humans. They are a large part of how we communicate, since the web is a largely text based medium designed to allow humans to communicate and share information. It is useful for us to have control over the words that appear on it. HTML provides structure and meaning to our text. CSS allows us to precisely style it, and JavaScript contains a number of features for manipulating strings, creating custom welcome messages and prompts, showing the right text labels when needed, sorting terms into the desired order, and much more. So we can do a lot of things to manipulate strings. Let's look at how JavaScript does that. Pretty much all of the programs we've shown you so far in the course have involved some string manipulation. String the basics. Strings are dealt with similarly to numbers at first glance, but when you dig deeper, you'll start to see some notable differences. Let's start by entering some basic lines into the browser developer console to familiarize ourselves. So if we want to open up our browser developer console, right click the page, inspect, and then just go to your console specifically. See, now I'm in my console. To start with, enter the following line. So const string equals the revolution will not be televised. All right, let's copy this. Uh, and then if we call console log string, see if I can call that in here. Cool. It prints out the log in the console and it prints out the return value from this function, which is undefined. All right. So now we are assigning a string to a variable called string. The string is the revolution will not be televised. We know this is the string because this is where the quotation mark starts and ends. We know this is a variable because here's the variable declaration, and here's the assignment operator assigning the value to the variable. All right, if you don't do this or miss one of the quotes, oh yeah, I skipped something. Just like we do with numbers, we are declaring a variable. Yep. Initializing it with a string value. Yep. And then returning the value. The only difference here is that when with writing a string, you need to surround the value with quotes. That's the key thing, surrounding the value with quotes. If you don't do this or miss one of the quotes, you'll get an error. Try entering the following lines. Let's see, bad strings. Let's just try one of them. No quotes, error. One quote obviously going to be an error. One quote obviously going to be an error. All right, so we already know why they don't work because quotation marks. If the browser can't find it, then an error is raised, e.g., missing before statement. This one is unexpected identifier is because it can read this and assume this is supposed to be a variable. I'm assuming. Um, If the browser can see where a string starts but can't find the end of a string, as indicated by the second quote, it complains with an error with unterminated string literal. Let's see that. Uh, Well, we get different errors on this browser console, but if they say so. Um, the following will work if you previously defined the variable string. Try it now. So yeah, nothing special here. Assigning a variable to another variable. Bad string is now set to have the same value as string. Cool, cool, cool. You can use single quotes or double quotes. Nothing too crazy here. I said before that the preference generally is single quotes or is double quotes and reserving single quotes for if you're using it inside of a double quote. But otherwise, it really doesn't matter. But yeah, that is the preference if you are using both, or if you have a case where you need both. There's very little difference between the two in which you use is down to personal preference. You should choose one and stick to it. However, differently quoted code can be confusing, especially if you use two different quotes on the same string. The following will return an error, single quote plus double quote. Obviously, don't mix the two. Browser will think the string has not been closed because the other type of quote you are using contain your string can appear in the string you are not using to contain your string can appear in the string. For example, both of these are okay. Single, double. Would you eat a fish supper? And then double, single, I'm feeling blue. So like this is definitely the preference over something like this. At least when you're working with me. Um, However, you can't include the same quote mark inside the string if it's being used to contain them. The following will error as it confuses the browser as to where the string ends. All right, so obviously you can't use single quotes 3 times because you need to clarify where string start and ends. And this one thinks it starts and ends here rather than starts and here. All right, escaping characters in a string. This is important. This way you don't have to worry about quotation marks at all. Um, this is the escape variable right here. To fix our previous problem code line, we need to escape the problem quote mark. Escaping characters mean that we do something to them to make sure they are recognized as text, not part of the code. In JavaScript, we do this by putting a backslash before the character. Try this. So this is the escape character once again. You can see it work. All right, you can escape other characters in the same way, and there are some special codes beside. See escape sequences for more details. That's something you can look at on your own. But understanding how the browser might generate string is important. So understanding that they might generate the escape character in other cases, and that might be something you have to consider when you're manipulating your strings. All right, concatenating string. What does that mean? Concatenate just means join together. To join together strings in JavaScript, you can use a different type of string called a template literal. All right, so we've seen template literals. That's the backtick. A template literal looks like a normal string, but instead of using single or double quotation marks, you use backtick characters. So, const greeting, hello. So if I do greeting, as you can see, prints out like any regular string with the single quotes. All right, this can work like a normal string, except you can include variables in it wrapped inside the $ bracket characters, and the variable's value will be inserted into the result. So const name equals Chris, const greeting equals hello name. All right. So this is how we do string interpolation. You can interpolate a value of a variable in a string by using backticks and the $ and the bracket. So when you wrap a variable in a $ and backticks while inside of a string literal, it will evaluate the value of the variable and add it to the string. All right, you can use the same technique to join together two variables. So we have const1, which is hello, and const2, a string of how are you. So then we're gonna make joined, and joined is gonna be literally one set of backticks, and then two variables being evaluated, 1 and 2. And that's how you're gonna take values that you get from the object, things that we make API requests from, and then you're gonna literally put them into the page through methods of string interpolation. And this is how you make dynamic variables, things like user logins. You probably want to interpolate which current users signed in and say hi, and then the current user, rather than hard code that in. All right, so concatenation and context. Let's have a look at concatenation being used in action. They made a button called press me. What does this button do? They have document query selector button, so they pick up the button from the DOM, right? Query selector is a DOM method, DOM being the document object model. So here's the object, the document object. And this is a model of the actual document. So this is the DOM object. Query selecting on the DOM object, and then looking for a button on this, once again, DOM object. Now they have this greet function, and what they do with this greet function? Name equal prompt. What is your name? So it's gonna prompt us, the user, to ask what is the name, and then it's gonna take that input and assign it to the name variable, and then lastly, it's gonna alert, hello name, nice to see you. Then they add on the event listener onto the button, a click, and then the click event listener is gonna trigger the greet function. So here it is, greet function. What is your name? Hello, Sage. Nice to meet you. So this is how we use string interpolation or concatenation in real life. So that's a good example. Here we're using the window prompt function, which asks the user to answer a question via a pop-up dialog, then stores the text they enter inside a given variable, in this case, name. We then use window.alert function to display, here's the alert, display another pop-up containing a string, which inserts the name into a general greeting message. You can also concatenate using strings, using the plus operator. So in here we have greeting and name being Chris, greeting being hello. So now they're just going to do greeting plus name. And we see hello, Chris. Greeting plus the space plus the name. However, template literals usually give you more readable code. So those are your options. Sometimes there's a preference for the plus. Sometimes there's a preference for the template literal for readability. All right, numbers versus strings. We already seen what happens when you try and combine numbers and strings. The number object converted to a string. All right, so name front number equals 242. If you console log the two of them together, you're gonna see the combination of the strings. So front space 242. So really the key to remember here is that numbers get treated as a string when you try and concatenate the two. Let's see here. Is there anything they're telling us super important? If you have a numeric variable that you want to convert to a string but not change otherwise, or a string variable that you want to convert to a number but not change otherwise, you can use the following two constructs. The number object converts anything passed to it into a number if it can. We played around with that a few times with the number class and that turning things to a number object. Conversely, every number has a method called toString that you can call to turn that number into a string. So we looked at that also. These constructs can be really useful in some situations. For example, if a user enters a number into a form text field, it's a string. However, if you want to add this number to something, you'll need it to be a number. So you can pass it through number to handle this well. All right. Including expressions in strings. You can include JavaScript expressions and temperate literals as well as simple variables. What do they mean by expressions? Should be functions, I think. Let's see. As well as simple variables, and the results will be included in the result. Song assigned to fight the youth. Score is being assigned to the value 9. Highest score is being assigned to 10. Output equals I like this song, and then the song I give it a score of, and here's the expression. Score, thank you, divided by highest score times 100. And if you console log the output, you'll see the evaluated amount. So this could be something like this, or this could be a literal function, something that calls like calculate score, something like that. Well, I'll be right back. I gotta use the bathroom. Pause it. All right. All right. So we saw that we can use expressions. Next, we have multi-line strings. Temperate literals respect the line breaks in the source code, so you can write strings that span multiple lines with backticks. So this is nice if you want to make a large paragraph of text. You want to use backticks. Regular strings do not handle that well. Text area. But if I want to do text area equals, it's a single quote, you can already see it's starting to break it up and not respect line breaks. So backticks are for the large paragraphs that you want to split up so that way it's more readable. All right, to have equivalent output using a normal string, you'd have to include line break characters /n in the string. So instead of doing something like this, you'd have to use the escape and then the n, and this is why escapes are very useful and understanding what you can use with escapes. And also sometimes your code, sometimes the page might actually be coded with line breaks in it. So if you're trying to manipulate the page or strings on the page and you receive /n's instead of spaces or line breaks, you definitely have to consider this in your manipulation of the string. All right, so that's the very basics of strings covered in JavaScript 720. In the next article, we'll build on this, looking at some built-in methods available to the strings. So this is something I want y'all to do on your own time, which is really get familiar with string methods and also getting familiar with number methods, array methods, object methods. Those are things y'all have to study on your own time, and will be relevant for problem solving in JavaScript, because you need the methods on the basic primitive data types. You need those methods because those are the core of manipulating everything in JavaScript. All right. So strings as an object. Everything in JavaScript is an object. And here saying most things are objects, but 99% certain everything in JavaScript is an object. When you create a string, for example, by using const string goes, this is my string, your variable becomes a string object instance, and as a result, has a large number of properties and methods available to it. So the same way we learned about numbers being number objects, so num equals 1, num equals 1. Type of num, and we get access to string and all the other methods on it. Num dot value of. So the same way we can do that, we can say string equals, this is a string, and string now has access to all the methods that strings will have. Things like replace. I want to replace the spaces with line breaks instead. So this only replace on the first. If I call replace all. So string manipulation, all string objects have methods, the methods that the string class provides to it, as well as the properties that the string class provides to it. So all of these. So let's look at some of the useful ones. All right, finding the length of a string. You can use the length property. Try entering the following line. We're gonna keep messing with our string. String.length, we got 16 characters. All right, super simple. Retrieving a specific string character. You can also use a bracket notation. This means you can include square brackets on the end of your variable name. Include the square brackets so you can include the number of the character you want to return. So if I wanted to return the first letter, I'd use the 0 index. Thank you. So if I want to return the last, I can use a negative. I can't use -1. Well, one thing I could do is say string.length. And then I think I gotta do -1. So the reason why I gotta do -1 for the total is because strings and all arrays. So when I'm calling .length, I'm treating string like an array. I know that doesn't mean much to y'all, but like essentially instead of it being I think I could do string dot split. All right, so this is essentially an array of letters, right? And at the 0 index is T, which is what we saw here. String at the 0 index is T. If I do string.length, we know string.length is 16, and this is the length, 16, but there's nothing at the 16th index because we started at 0. So to offset the length to match up for the fact that 1 is technically starting at 0, I have to subtract 1, so that way I get the 15th index. 16 is my length, the number of characters, 1 to 16. But since the index starts at 0, I have to offset the 1. So my 1 is 0, and my 16th is 15, is the 15th index. So yeah, strings are somewhat treated like arrays because they are similar, and have similar methods like the length method on it. Yeah. All right, remember, computers count from 0 and not 1. To retrieve the last character of any string, you could use the following line, combining this technique with the length property we looked at above. The length of the string Mozilla is 7, but because the count starts at 0, the last character's position is at 6. So using length -1 gets us the last character. All right, super simple, but easy to get yourself tricked up over. All right, testing if a string contains a substring. Sometimes you want to find if a similar string is present inside of a larger one. This is a common problem. This can be done using the includes method, which takes a single parameter, so a substring you want to search for. It returns true if the string contains a substring and false otherwise. So does Mozilla include Zilla in it? Console logs found Zilla. Otherwise, no Zilla here. So obviously this should be true and found Zilla because Zilla is included in Mozilla. All right, often you want to know if a string starts or ends with a particular substring. This is common enough need that there are two special methods for this. Starts with and ends with. All right. So when we call browser starts with Zilla, obviously it doesn't start with Zilla. So you get the error or you get the else statement. And then asking the browser if it ends with Zilla, you get found Zilla. So you hit the first condition. All right. So yeah, generally when people have common uses for strings or any other data type, they usually become methods or properties because we constantly need the a solution around that problem. Finding the position of a substring in a string. If the string, you can find the position of a substring inside a larger substring, inside of a larger string using the index of method. This method takes two parameters, the substring that you want to search for, and an optional parameter that specifies the starting point of the search. So two arguments, one being the substring that you're searching for, so whatever word you're looking for, and then the optional one specifying where you should start. Where's the starting point? All right, so if the string contains the substring index of returns the index of the first occurrence of the substring. If the string does not contain the substring, index of returns -1. All right, so we're going to start with tagline. And then we're going to say tagline dot index of, and then x should give us -1 because there's no x in it. But if I put m, so I'll put md, and still all 0. If I put r, that starts at 6. Okay. So now that you know how to find the first occurrence of a substring, how do you go about finding subsequent occurrences, right? Like developers and then the second developer. You can do that by passing in a value that's greater than the index of the previous occurrence as the second parameter to the method. All right, so dev starts at 20. So if I want to find the index of the second dev, I got to start with I got to put my starting point after 20. And that gives me the second dev, which starts at 35. All right, so makes sense.
Mhm.
All right. I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is an example of things that y'all should go through on your own time. These are very useful methods to know, and y'all should honestly go through every single one and play around with it because I know them and I'm pretty familiar with them. I still got to, for refamiliarize myself with them every now and then for coding interviews. But generally speaking, I'm good with these. So y'all should get comfortable being able to reference what you need for what you're trying to do. All right. On to the next and final one, which is arrays. I did not put any of this stuff in our notes. Let me open up. Not this coding course. Let me open up javascript.js again. I don't remember doing this, but I did this. Anyway. We're going to add a new section for arrays now. Arrays are a lot more complicated than strings. All right. Make sure you have your notes out and we write these out, since this is something we're not as familiar with. We haven't been using as much, even though y'all have seen some array methods. All right, what is an array? Arrays are generally described as list-like objects. They are basically single objects that contain multiple values stored in a list. Array objects can be stored in variables and dealt with in much the same way as any other type of value. The difference being that we can access each value inside the list individually and do super useful and efficient things with the list. Like loop through it and do the same thing to every value. Maybe we've got a series of product items and their prices stored in an array, and we want to loop through them all and print them out on an invoice while totaling all the prices together and printing out the total price at the bottom. If we didn't have arrays, we'd have to store every item in a separate variable, then call the code that does the printing and adding separately for each item. This would be much longer to write out, less efficient, and more error prone. If we had 10 items to add to the invoice, it would already be annoying, but what about 100 or 1,000? We'll return to this example later on in the article. As in previous articles, let's learn about the basics of arrays by entering some examples into the browser developer console. All right, so we have the option of using the browser developer console, or we can use our VS Code IDE. For this case, we're going to use the IDE because I want to have this to reference. So I'm going to start by making an array with these values. Const shopping, assign it an array with these values. So to make an array has to have the open brackets, and then all the items are separated by commas. So it could be strings, it could be numbers, it could even be a mix of the two. It can also be objects. All these things are valid elements or items being passed into the array, as long as you have the brackets to find the list of them. All right, so we got bread, milk, cheese, In the above example, each item is a string, but in an array, we can store various data types, string number objects, and even other arrays. We can also mix data types in a single array. We do not have to limit ourselves to storing only numbers in one array, and in another, only strings. For example, 1, 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, tree 7, 9, 5, an array of 0, 1, 2. All right, so before proceeding, create a few example arrays. Here's my example array. 0, another array, 0, 1, 2, and then last number. All right, let's find the length of array. We saw the length of a string. Can we see the length of array? I need a console log this. Let's also console log shopping's length. Where am I? Coding course. All right, random length is 3 items. And then shopping length is 5 items. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Separated by the strings, by the commas, not by whatever amount of objects or objects inside the other objects. It just considers how many objects specifically are on the top level. It doesn't go deeper inside of its own objects to add that onto the length. All right, so length is a very common one, super useful. Accessing and modifying array items. So how do we access them? We access them just like with the string, using bracket notation commonly. All right, so random. All right, so this is me accessing the first item in it. You can also modify an item in an array by giving a single array and a new value. Try this. So here they access the index and then they overwrite that index with a new string. All right. So we're going to try that right here. Accessing modifying. So at the first index, instead, we want it to be a string of modified. Modified random. And this will return what we change random O to be. So if we call it again, you see first item in random is 0. Now the modified random is modified. If I call this again instead, it still gives me 0. Oh, well, yeah, this modifying is happening after. Well, if I do first item in random now, it shows us as now modified. So this overwrites the original value. So this is something we call what is it called? What is that term for something that is modifying the original, not the copy? Do you remember that term, John?
Um,
It's something along the lines of making beings immutable and making pure arrays. Uh, I wonder if they mention it. Push versus. They probably do mention it. I'll probably find it if I just keep reading. All right, let's keep reading and let's see if I find what I'm trying to think of. If not, I'll describe the idea on the second go. All right. Note that an array inside an array is called a multi-dimensional array. You can access an item inside an array that is itself inside another array by chaining two sets of square brackets together. For example, to access one of the items inside the array that is the third item inside the random array, see previous section, we could do something like this. So they want to get the value in here. First index is 0, second index is 1. Here's the third index. So they are calling random 2, 0, 1, 2. So to get the third item, you need the second index number 2, not the third index, the second index. And then from there, they're also grabbing the third element using the second index. So they should get 2 from this. Let's look at our random. We have 0, 1, 2. So if we said random at 1, which should be another array, and then at 2, we should get 2 from that. All right, first item in multi-dimensional, and this should be last item. All right, so you can always try making more modifications to your array before moving on. Play around a bit and see what works and what doesn't. Finding items in an array. Man, that's what they're leaving this at? Okay. There are going to be better methods in some of these ways they're showing y'all. But these are good for introduction, I'd say. Finding items in an array. This is fine if you know the index of an item, but what if you don't? You can find the index of a particular item using index of. So if you know the item that you want to access, but you don't know the index, you want to use index of. And then you can use the actual index to access the array. This takes an item as an element and returns the index or -1 if the item was not found. All right. So this is one way to do it. The other way to do this for finding items in an array is the find method. So if you know the element, but also don't know the index, you can say something like dot find. So I'm gonna say shopping dot find And what I want to find is a method. First argument takes is called the predicate. The predicate, I believe, is just the element, right? Find calls predicate once for each element of the array in ascending order. Oh, predicate is the function that's going to run. Okay. Until it finds one where predicate returns true. So the function is going to run is the first argument. And this function should return a Boolean. It looks for whatever turns true to hit the find. Um, Otherwise, find returns undefined. It also takes a second argument called this arg, which could be anything. Let's try find, right? So we throw in a function that's going to say every single element or every single item in the array. We want the item that equals the element. I'm gonna say hummus. So the same way, if we know the item is gonna be a string, that's hummus. But we don't have the index of what hummus is, and we could just do this to find it, and we'll access it the same way as if we were doing like shopping and then the actual index number. So see, it got me hummus. The other way that it was mentioning was hummus ID equals shopping index of, and then search element being hummus. So these are the two ways you can do it. Hummus and hummus. One using the find that takes a function. I use the arrow function to look for an item that equals hummus. The other one was finding the index of hummus and then using that ID, the index, to then access it through the bracket notation. Whatever looks cleaner and is your preference is up to you, really. But I will say, iterating through an array is a little more expensive than if you had the ID. But index of, I believe, still iterates through the array anyway. It might not, but I think it might. All right. Adding items to the array. To add one or more items to the end of an array, we can use the push. Note that you need to include one or more items that you want to add to the end of the array. All right, so push is one way. Push and unshift are one ways. Removing items. Do they not talk about slice and whatnot? All right, so difference between push, unshift, and pop. All right, this is probably going to be the best article to talk about what I want to talk about. Maybe. Hold up. Hopefully. All right, 4 methods to add, remove value to and from array. array the push element, add push elements to the last index of array, return the length of an updated array. So this type of element mutates the exact original array. This does not make a copy of the array. And this is a little bit dangerous because you don't want to mutate things. You want to kind of keep them the same if you want it to be a pure, if you want your code to be pure and safe from side effects. Side effects being things you don't expect to happen. So for example, if you have an array with a certain amount of values and another function is expecting that array to have a certain amount of values, but another function is calling the push method on the same array, you will be mutating the original value of the array, and any other function or anything depending on that original value of the array is now having to contend with the change results. And that might be what you want, but also it might not be. And that could be a side effect. Versus like making a copy of the original array now stays the same. And anything that wants to use the modified array will use the modified copy of the array. So certain methods allows us to modify the original array directly, and then certain methods allows us to modify a copy of it. So we're going to look at the difference. Push modifies the original array. Array.push 789 onto array, and then you see 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 7, 8, 9. Pop will remove the last element of an array. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Pop. Now it's just 4. Unshift adds or pushes an element to the first index. So push put it to the end. Unshift puts it to the front. Shift will remove the first element of an array. So pop does it to the last one, 5. This one does it to the first. All right, they do not talk about it at all about modifying arrays. So, update arrays without mutating the original. When working with tools like React and Redux, they discourage making direct edits to the state. Why is this? It's more prone to errors. The less you mutate your data, the better, and the easier it will be to reason about your code. The concept of not changing values is known as immutability. It is one thing to handle immutability with primitive data types like strings and integers, but it can get more complex when using data structures like arrays or objects. Here's how you can apply all the different possible changes to an array without changing the original array. So add an element to the end of an array. Most of these example leverage a spread operator to take the values of the original arrays and use them in a new one. In this example, we can use the entire array, then append the element to the end of the array. So instead of using methods like push, the safe method would be, here's your original array, and then you create a new array, and you use the spread operator on the original array. This will inject all the element values into this array, and then at last it will add the element that you are trying to insert at the end. So let's look at what that looks like. Modifying an array without mutating. So also I'm gonna console log out the push and whatnot. I'm gonna say bread. All right. I'm gonna make a new shopping variable. And new shopping variable is going to be the same as shopping. Whatever shopping is at this point of time. And what do we want to add on to this? Bread, milk, cereal. I say cereal. All right, so new shopping is two object, hummus, noodles, bread, milk, and cereal. All right, and then if we look at what we did over here, shopping not push, bread and milk. Let's see, where do we do that? Modified shopping over here, 7 and 1. So you see the difference with these. Shopping not push will return I think this is either the elements that is this either the length? Because shopping length started at 5. We added 2, so the new length is 7. So it might be the index or the length. I'm not sure which one exactly, but I think it's the index because shopping not shift took out the first element and it returned the index. So it looks like it was returning the last index that it manipulated. Hummus, and then new shopping, we returned an object that pointed back to new shopping. But what I want to show y'all, what I actually should show y'all is new shopping versus shopping. So new shopping has cereal, shopping has not been modified. But as you see, the way we modified this one, shopping has been modified. That's why new shopping respects all the new values, the bread, the milk that was pushed in from this method. So this is all about immutability, adding an element to the beginning of an array. You put the element, combine two arrays into a third, first, second. Again, spread operator on the first, spread operator on the second. Remove an element from the end of an array. What you want to do is call slice. So let's do that too. Newer shopping, and then we're going to call it shopping, and then we're going to take off this element and that element. Slice starts. The first argument is a start, the beginning index of the specified portion. If start is undefined, then the slice begins at 0. The end index of the specified portion, this is exclusive to the element at the index of the end. So this is going to slice off anything outside of I guess where you're telling to start and end. So if we're telling you to start at 1, it's going to start at this index and instead return everything after the 2, the string of 2. So if I tell it to start at 2, it's going to give us hummus, noodles, bread, milk, and that's really what we want. But just to show y'all, let's console log it out and build up into there. So we're going to say new shopping and then newer shopping and shopping as well. All right, so new shopping still the same with the 2, Newer shopping no longer has the 2 because we're starting with 1 off. Has everything else. Shopping is the same without serial. And you see newer shopping, since it's going off of shopping, it doesn't have serial. So let's actually say newer shopping is off new shopping. Leave shopping alone. We're not manipulating that at all. And we don't want an object. We just want our actual food items. So we're going to say slice off the first 2 elements and start instead at the second index, which is the 3rd element, which is hummus. All right, so let's try this. Now we should get noodles, bread, milk, and cereal. So newer shopping, hummus, noodles, bread, milk, and cereal. Now it's just the food items. So that looks good. Shopping remains the same, and new shopping remains the same. All right, removing an element from the beginning of array. Instead of doing that, from beginning of an array, they still use slice. They use their start index at 0, and then they say the last, everything up to the last. So what is this? Another trick with slice is that if the end argument is negative, you can count backwards from the end of an array. So in this example, 0 does not change the beginning of the array, but we step 1 short, so that the new array only contains the first 2 elements. How's that? I want to see that. I think they wrote the wrong thing. Is that from the beginning of an array? This is not removing an element from the beginning. It's like this one right here will remove. Wait a minute. Did they put that backwards? Or am I tripping? All right. So in this example, they remove the 1. Or here's the last slice. So this is removing an element from the beginning of the array. And this is removing an element from the end. Because they slice off the last element. 1, 2. All right, so they wrote this wrong. It's actually the opposite happening here. All right, insert an element at a specific index. This is one way to do it. Original equals 1, 2, 4. L equals 3. Insert at 2. Original dot slice. I do not like this way. If I was gonna do this, right, I just make a new copy of this. Like if this is the original, I say and I'd rather just do copy, and then wherever element I want to put it at, if I want to put it at 2, especially if I know where I want to put it at, I'd rather just do this and then say equals the element that I want to insert it at. Now, if I say copy at 2 is 3, what do they do? Insert element at a specific index. Though I think they're trying to retain the 1, 2, and 4. What is this array even supposed to be? Array, slice, insert at. So this is supposed to be original. All right, that's interesting. I definitely think there's a better way to do this. I do like the spread operator. Original.slice seems interesting. They're doing this because they want to copy whatever it was at the time. And they want to put the element, the new element, and then also put it back wherever it was at the time. So I get this. I get this. I wonder if there's a better way to do it. Not that I can think of off the top of my head, but this is a good solution for now. Replace an element at a specific index. This is what I was thinking of. So instead of doing this, if I want to replace a certain element, I'd much rather do the copy. If I know the index I want to replace it at, and just replace it directly. But adding an element in between other elements, I think this is the better solution. Delete an element at a specific index, delete at. Yeah, using slice to delete at is probably better. Not probably better. It's definitely better. Delete a specific element or original.filter. And using the filter is obviously the best way to delete a specific element. So the difference between this and this is that this one is if you have the index number, this is assuming you just know something on the item, like either the value of the item, whether it's a string or a number, or if it has an ID or something like that. Assumes you know something more than just the index to delete it. And then you filter it out. All right, so these are all helpful and very useful for not modifying the original array. So generally speaking, when we're modifying arrays, the preference is for y'all to use things like filter, things like the spread operator, things like slice over push and pull, and like straight up assigning. Assigning is only okay when you're assigning it to copies, deep copies. All right, let's see. All right, so we saw some of theirs. Splice is all mutating. I recommend looking at some of these for yourself, but that's if y'all want to learn the mutatable way. The for loop is very important. This is fundamentals. So accessing every item. To access every item, you're gonna have to be looking at loops. Very often, you'll want to access every item in the array. You can do this using the for of statement. All right, we got about 15 more minutes. All right, let's play around with birds. I don't know if I did loops in here before. Oh, I did do loops. All right, we're going to bring these down again. And say looping through an array. We have const birds and then for. So what is this doing? We have for bird of birds, console log bird. So there's a difference between bird of and bird in. And I think there's other ones too. Let's look at the difference, right? I'm gonna console log the stuff that I'm gonna comment out the stuff we were working on before. Parrot, falcon, and owl. What happens if I do in? 0, 1, and 2. So I think the difference is the index. Of gives me the elements, in give me the index. I do for bird of birds. What bird? I also do that. I also do this. So any declaration seems to work. I'm not really sure what the difference of between const, let, and var in terms of declaring a variable in here. But essentially what we're doing is we are declaring a variable called bird, either by saying it's a var with a let or with a const. Doesn't seem to really make a difference here. Once we declare the variable, we're declaring it of, if we're just saying of birds, of this list, and every single bird is an element of this list. If I say in, I get the index in the list instead of the element of the list. Very small difference, very hard to remember, but it'll make a difference. Sometimes you want to do the same thing to each item in an array, leaving you with an array containing the change items. You can do this using map. The code below takes an array of numbers. So before I do map, I'm going to show y'all the other way to do what we just did with the for loop. You can also do for each in the same way. You have an item. It takes a predicate, which is a function, callback function as its first argument. So for each item in here, we want to console log the item. That's going to do the same thing that that is doing. Parrot, falcon, owl, parrot, falcon, owl. And now the last time for the next one, we're going to do map. Map takes a callback function and it returns, it changes the value. So a function accepts up to 3 arguments. The map method calls the callback function one time for each element in the array. Calls a defined callback function on each element of array and returns an array that contains the result. So this is going to manipulate the array to be whatever you essentially map it to, right? Whatever the function changes the value to be. So let's say we have parrot, falcon, owl. Instead, I want to turn all these strings into objects. So I'm going to say item, and I want each of these to turn to an object that has the key of item and then the name of whatever the item is. And then for each of those, I'm going to console log. Now I'm going to see, instead of actually passing an arrow function, console log itself is a function. So I'm going to try and just pass the function console log. All right. What? Map. Each one should be an item. And then for each, we console log. Now, why does it look like this? Any ideas why it looks like this?
I'm not sure about that one.
Okay. So now we're just getting undefined. Okay. I tried to make this an item,
Mm-hmm.
but I'm being too simplistic. So this is opening. This is opening a function scope. So I have to put the return statement in it for it to understand that it's returning something.
Yeah.
Otherwise, if I want to return and otherwise, if I wanted to assume that it's returning something, I gotta put it in parentheses. So now it'll understand that it's returning an object with items.
Okay. There we go.
So this is all about the return. Another way to do that, if I say return and then item. So that's just because having open brackets will make it assume that uh, it's in the scope of a function and that I got to return something in that scope, right? Understand?
Yeah.
All right. All right. So now it understands that it's returning an item, an object with the key of item and the value being whatever the item value is, parrot, falcon, owl. All right. So that's the map. You iterate over everything and manipulate it into whatever the function returns. This function returns an object. So now instead of getting just strings, now we get objects. All right. Sometimes you want to do the same thing to each item in an array, leaving you with an array containing the changed items. You can do this using map. The code below takes an array of numbers and doubles each number. All right. So they have a function called double. It just multiplies it by 2. And then they have numbers.map. Map takes in a function as the first argument. So then the double function is what's being passed. When you console log the results, you get the numbers doubled. So map is super useful. Another super useful one is filter. All right. Sometimes you want to create a new array containing only the items in the original array that match some condition, some test. You can use that using filter. The code below takes an array of strings and returns an array containing just the strings that are greater than 8 characters long. All right. Function is long. City.length is greater than 8. Filter everything by what is long. And then the cities that made it are Liverpool and Edinburgh. All right, let's try something like that. Birds.filter. Oh, and also you're going to notice that these functions are not mutating the original. So even though I call map here, this made a copy of birds and mapped it out into and returned a whole new result. So when I call birds.filter, I'm going to be calling it on the original list of strings. So I want to filter, and the function is going to be string.length. Has to be greater than 3. And then for each, and then console log. This might look a little funny again. Because the console log is logging out everything passed to it, which is the value, the index, and the array. So our value is parrot and our value is falcon. Those are only ones that are greater than 3 in terms of the length of the string. Owl is only 3, so it's not going to pass. And it's only going to console log those 3. And it's going to console log out each argument being passed to the for each function. And the for each function takes 3 arguments: value, index, and the original array. So value, index, and original array. The value being a string, the index being a number in the original array. Parrot, 0, in the original array. All right. One key thing to remember about filters is, and I'm gonna keep repeating this every time, is that generally when we're manipulating things on our web pages, we don't actually delete them. We filter them out. And the reason why we don't actually delete them and we filter them out is because filtering is much more intuitive for a UI than a delete is. And what I mean by that is like when the user is let's say deleting something from the page, they might want to undo it. And if they want to undo it, we don't want them to actually delete the information from our database. What we want to do is hide the information from the database until they are certain they want to delete it. When they're certain they want to delete it, then we should actually trigger the delete on our API. And then when the user reloads the page, it doesn't reload with the result. But until we are certain that the result is deleted, we just want to hide the information and then not present the information on subsequent loads if it actually been deleted. So filter is going to be your preference when you're creating a UI that deletes elements out of it. So that's really key to remember. You want to use filters and not actually remove elements from an array when you're playing around with deletes. All right, and then last thing we're going to cover is converting between strings and arrays. So like I said, strings are very similar to arrays. They have similar methods and properties like length. The split method is what we're going to look at too. All right. So often you'll be presented with some raw data contained in a big long string, and you might want to separate the useful items out into a more useful form and then do things to them, like display them in a data table. To do this, we can use the split method. In its simplest form, this takes a single parameter, the character you want to separate the string at, and returns a substring between the separator. All right, I'm gonna speed this up. Essentially, there's two methods that we want to know: split and join. Converting between strings. This is a really long string with a lot of spaces. This will be a string. All right. The join method will convert arrays to strings. And the split method will convert strings to arrays. All right, so what does that look like? Console.log array.join. And we want to join them with spaces in between. So we're going to put a little space in our join. And then for this one, we're going to console log string.split. And we want to split the string by the spaces. All right, this will be a string is now a string combined together by the spaces. And then string.split is now an array that says this is a really long array separated by spaces. All right, makes sense. Join and split. Those are the two conversions. All right, so you're gonna see that. Let's play with it. Data, Manchester, Split it. They split it by the commas. So now they have an array of cities separated by a comma list. Finally, try finding the length of your new array and retrieving some items from it. Cities.length, cities 0, cities 1. So they're combining all the things that we did before, accessing the length property on the array, accessing items on that array, accessing the last item. And then finally, they combine that array into a list of, into a string with separated by commas. And then the last thing they want to show you is converting it with the toString method. So arrays have a toString method. Another way of converting array toString is arguably simpler than join, as it doesn't take a parameter, but more limiting. It looks like toString always uses a comma to join things. So let's do that. String.split. Array. So as you see, the toString method is a little bit more limiting because it forces it to be comma separated. But if you just need an easy, quick comma separated string from your array, it's very easy to just use toString over having to use the join method and specifying the comma. But yeah, those are your options. My preference is usually join and split. I don't really use that toString function. But yeah, that's class for today. Thank you for coming. And let's talk about